Good morning to those of you just joining us. I see participants starting to enter the virtual room. We'll get started in just a few seconds. Hey everybody, welcome to the virtual discussion series, part 3 of 3 for synchronizing information for disaster response logistics. I see participants continuing to enter the virtual room. Feel free to use the chat, say hello, let us know who's here, say hi to our panelists, and we'll get started very, very shortly. Hey everybody, welcome. All right, well, while others continue to load into the room, I'd like to welcome those of you who are here. This is the All Hazards Consortium's virtual discussion series, part 3 of 3 for synchronizing information for disaster response logistics. And today we will get the technical perspective of the fleet movement application, including a live demo. So let's go ahead and move on with our slides as people roll in. Welcome. Feel free to use the chat to say hello. My name is Laura Johnson. I'm the Director of Conferences and Events for the All Hazards Consortium. And just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. We are recording today's session and we'll send that link to you post-event. So feel free to share that with all your colleagues, your peers. Feel free to watch it again. And also, we encourage you to make comments in the chat and ask questions through the Q&A function of Zoom. We'd love to hear from you, whether it's to seek clarification, to provide solutions of your own, or if you have any questions for our panelists today. So today, as well as the other 2 parts in this series, is a 90-minute session. So we'll get you out by 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. We'll start with some brief introductory remarks, and then we'll spend the first portion of our presentation on giving you a demonstration of the Fleet Movement app. And we'll show you how that works, what information it contains, and tell you a little bit more about that. And then after that, we'll talk about the FEMA lifelines before we end our third part of today's agenda on the DHS National Critical Functions. And we have a couple experts with us today on that. And then we'll provide enough time at the end for some Q&A. So we will be able to get to our listeners' questions and comments today. Today we have Carrie Trapasso with Bent Ear Solutions, Chris Bond, Geospatial Information Officer with FEMA, and last but not least, Greg McShane with Integrated Operations Division, Strategy, Policy, and Resources with DHS. I'd like to introduce Tom Moran, the Executive Director of the All Hazards Consortium. Tom?
Thank you, Laura. Good morning, everybody. We have some folks that have been with us for a little bit and some new folks. So this community of people that are talking today have really been working this issue from a number of spots over the years. What I want to do first is just give you an introduction to the consortium and the sites. More importantly, the private sector's efforts. They've been collecting information and utilizing it now into a framework that they can share with government and vice versa. So I'm really glad Chris Vaughn was able to join us today from FEMA GIS, and Greg McShane works with CISA. This should be a great discussion on public-private information sharing. So let's go to the next slide. Let me just give you a quick little background. For those who may or may not be aware, the consortium is a 501c3 nonprofit started by states, DC, Maryland, Virginia, actually, and then it's grew out from there. And being a Maryland 501c3, it is exempt from FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests. Now, why is that important? Many times what happens when government or industry have meetings like that, competitors, media, they want access to the notes, so they want to participate in the meetings, so forth. Well, that kind of kills the buzz in the room, right? Nobody wants to talk. Everybody's worried about, retribution. Well, The consortium provided a framework for the private sector that we didn't know was that important. So fast forward, we started from 2005 to 2012. We were doing a lot of work. When Sandy hit in 2012, everything changed. And all of a sudden, public and private started working together. They came up with information they were sharing. One example was there was a use case. They needed rooms in hotels and condos, and we found through private sector, we found a partner that manages this globally. They were able to get that data to the consortium. We said we would protect that. We got it into New York City, and they had rooms for thousands and thousands of rooms nobody even knew about that were unrented condos, apartments, and so forth. It's just one example of information and data that was shared under duress during Sandy. Move forward, right after that, in 2013, the Fleet Working Group began. That was the private sector electric companies, primarily, along with Bank of America and Verizon, and a few others, came to our board and said, hey, we want to start a working group, but we want to run it under you, but we want to fund it, we want to run it, govern it. We don't want you to do it. We want to do it under the consortium because we want to work with states, but we want to have a private environment. Okay, so that's when the multi-state fleet response working group was stood up. Fast forward to 2015, we got involved in a project, the private sector and DHS Science and Technology, on a secure information sharing initiative, and that gave birth to the SITES, the Sensitive Information Sharing Environment. It's a legal framework, but that project provided the resource to build out the framework for that, a working group, technology, and so forth. 2016, DHS CISA issued a grant to the consortium under a Security Resilience Challenge grant, where it provided additional resource now to really build out our use case or problem-solving process, our legal agreements, our ability to get more data and organize it. 2017, we actually put that to work in the hurricane season, and it was a game changer. It really helped coordinate a lot of things, and specifically, it helped coordinate all 50 states with electric utilities, moving resources from all over the country into the Gulf and East Coast ports so they could, take barges down to Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands. So it was tested under duress, and it went very well. So successful, in fact, in 2018, the board stood up the SICE Strategic Advisory Council, representatives from DHS, other federal agencies, state and local government, as well as private sector. And that body is still in place today, and it governs the direction of the SICE. How is it going to be used best for public and private benefit? How do we gather resources and so forth, and really advise on the strategic direction for that? 2019 was COVID, and COVID forced us to do a big technology investment in the Esri platform. And we took about 2 months, maybe a month to do a year project. And that gave us the technical framework for the SICE. Now we could actually get data, partition the data, separate users amongst use cases where it was really great. And fast forward to 2020, we took that framework and, all right, the number one problem the private sector was working on is moving resources across state lines, okay, for disasters. And what are the threats along those routes? What are the roadblocks? What's the weather? What are the resources, gas, fuel, lodging, commercial entities, rest stops, any data that would promote accelerating the movement of these resources and coordinating states and utilities, and now any supply chain really along a route. That was the first problem. We call it a use case that we worked on. We tested that with our Esri platform in 2020, and it was a home run. It actually helped sync up about 12 states with the private sector. It was truly operational information, much of it not shared outside of this, but the whole technical thing really started to take hold. And so here we are today. We're using this, we're going to use the SICE framework as a way to sync information, not just with states, but we hope with FEMA, we hope DHS and DOE and the other folks, so we can get on the same page, not for everything, but for a few things. So if you're not familiar with a SICE, go to the next slide. It's a legal framework. It segments users. There's a legal agreement. We do have an identity management platform, but inside the SICE, it combines trust. Everybody in there is in there for a reason. They're vetted. It provides planning. We break it up into problem-solving committees or use case committees. There are solutions produced from that. It bridges in the states. We actually have a state liaison committee that's part of this. And we just follow the planning process that everybody uses over and over. So next slide is, so what is the Fleet Movement app? The Fleet Movement app is a first of many tools that we are run from Esri that we are using to move fleets, right? And the data set, there's 2.5 million data points in this one single Esri map. And there'll be other maps coming behind this. But we needed some way to coordinate. And the data that's in there is public sourced, some is private, sensitive, not shared anywhere else. Some of it is unstructured data. We get texts all the time from the states or from the utilities. That's not shared out, but we can repurpose that and make sure we help FEMA and DHS and the states and industry all stay on the same page at the same time. So the next, where that's going, and I'll wrap up with this, is a concept called SICE-Net. Let's go to the next slide. So what is SICE-Net? It is using the SICE as an information hub that can be contributed to by anybody. Okay, but the SICE is going to synchronize state and industry, as well as federal agencies and nonprofit agencies on specific problems. So the first one we're looking at here, you see on the slide, is coordinated damage assessment. We've been doing some pilots in Virginia, and we have one screen that has both a state and a utilities damage assessment data. They don't share that data out anywhere else, but inside the SICE, it's safe, it's protected from FOIA, and we control who's able to look at that and for how long. That's one example. The other one would be road closure information. Another problem set would be, what's the best weather for flooding and wind and things like that. So we're all using the same basic weather, imagery and so forth. And we're actually working with Chris Vaughn and his folks at FEMA. One of the data layers we're working there is a live status of open and closed facilities. We're actually looking to expand that this year. So the idea is using the SICE to create a network, a technical net, where you do all this now, but it's all person to person, and this will make it automated, right? So there'll be MOUs in place and connections, but because we're using Esri, we can now integrate with WebEOC and other Esri accounts. It makes it very flexible. And I'm really glad to have Carrie Trapazzo on the phone with us today. Carrie was formerly with PEMA. I'll let her introduce herself. She's a great to work with, and she knows GIS, she knows Esri, and she runs kind of the backbone of the SICE and how we do it. She's going to provide a demo. I figured, let's stop talking. Let's get into what is this thing and what are the future forms of this. But it really is not about the tool and the data. It's about their trusted partnerships that are developed through solving problems together within SICE committees. That's really the bottom line, because without the trust, there's no sharing of data. Without the data, there's no apps. So Carrie's going to walk us through a demo. And Carrie, glad to have you. I'll have you introduce yourself, and then we can jump into the demo.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Tom. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So as Tom mentioned, my name is Carrie Trapasso. I'm the GIS director at Ventnor Solutions. Prior to that, I was the GIS admin at Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency. I directed several other state agencies in Pennsylvania from a GIS perspective. And I've been doing GIS for about 25 years. So a long time in this field. It's changing every day. I'm learning every day. And it's really fascinating how we're bringing all of this together. So what I'm going to do today is walk through a live demo. This is the app that we use throughout incidents, hurricanes, daily. And then I'm going to show you what we're doing to sort of enhance this so that we can use historical data in future exercises or just for future planning, maybe how something occurred during a particular time. So what we're looking at here is the live version of the Fleet Movement application. This has live radar in it. It has live weather watches, warnings, and advisories, and we'll dig into all the different data in just a few minutes. The purple lines that you see on here are major interstate routes. So when something happens, so just say a hurricane in the south, fleets are going to move from north to south to get to the resources and help to restore power or whatever it is that they're helping out with in that particular instance. So as we dig into this a little bit more, as Tom mentioned, this was first stood up as a response to COVID. So we wanted to bring all of the SICE information together, but we also wanted to know where COVID cases were occurring. So as you can see, these little red, and there's some gray and white, yellow, there's some red over here. Those are areas of COVID, and the red means it's a higher case count or a hotspot versus the yellows and the whites, which are lower case counts. The idea behind that was if during the height of COVID, if a crew was moving and they saw an area that was particularly high, they may have wanted to continue down the road or continue to a different area in order to stop. So as we zoom in, more information is going to appear. So you can see there's some labels. It just tells us how many cases and things. As I go in further, more information appears. So let me actually turn the COVID hotspot information off just because I want everybody to be able to see everything here. As Tom mentioned, there are millions of data points in this application, but in order to not clutter it up, what we've done is we have processes running in the background that buffers the information around those routes so that we're not just, loaded with hotels and loaded with gas stations, because obviously there'd be a lot here or a lot down this road. So we only have it around the major routes. If I go in a little bit further, you can start to see some things come into play here. So there's a pilot, little gas station or fuel stations, restaurants, hotels, there's pharmacy. We have a lot of information, so I'm going to dig into the data a bit at this point. We also have 511 road closures in here, so I'll show you that in a minute too. But we have fuel suppliers, different hotel, big box, so those are your Lowe's, your Home Depot, pharmacies, many different hotel chains, rest stops, generator suppliers, we have weigh stations in here, again, the pilots, Travel Centers of America, speedways, hospitals, PPE suppliers, weather watches and warnings. We also have real-time traffic. So you can see the real-time traffic. This is actually as it's occurring right now. So you can see this red area, there's a stoppage here. If I click on this, there's a disabled vehicle. So that's what's going on, and that's what's causing this traffic delay here. A lot of good information in here. How do you use this? So first, this works on anything. So this works on a device, a phone, a tablet, works on a computer. I'm demoing it on a computer today. So it's slightly different than if you'd have it on a phone, but it's the same application across the board. So if I was a truck and I'm driving down the road and I wanted to know where I was and I had it on my phone, I would actually see my location just like you would on any mapping software that you might use or a GPS. I don't have that today because I'm on a computer. So I'll simulate it by showing the tool that's in here. It's called Near Me. So basically, if I want to see what hotels, facilities, anything near me, I would come in here and click this point. And again, if I were driving, it would have automatically known where I was. So it brought up all of my facilities. If I come in here, there's Pizza Hut, Sonic, BP Oil, Chevron. There's lots of Pizza Huts in this area. If I were in my vehicle and I did this, it would give me turn-by-turn driving directions right to whatever I chose. Just to give you a little bit more idea, here's a bunch of hotels in the area. You can see all of the different hotels that are near me. And in this case, we also have the websites to the hotels that you can call. Phone number is right here. So it's just a really nice little application that brings a whole lot of information together. As Tom mentioned, there's information that's private, public. We've touched on a lot of public information, but some of the private information that I wanted to talk about is unstructured data. So let me back up here just a little bit. And I know Tom is probably going to mention something about this as well. So during an event, Tom and others get many emails and texts and information about declarations, waivers, travel, guidance, anything like that. So what we've done is we've taken that unstructured data and we've put it into a form. So basically it all comes in and it standardizes it. And we've been able to add it. So here's something on declarations, as I mentioned. You can see a couple of these states lit up red. This is from ELSA. So I left them in here from ELSA. But if I were to click on one of these states, and it could be down to the county or whatever the guidance is for, but if I were to click on one of these states, we've got the information right here. So this is the PDF attached right to the information right within the application itself. Tom, did you want to add anything to that particular point?
No, go right ahead.
All right, perfect. So we talked a little bit about that. We talked a little bit about, some of the private data, the road close data. So if I zoom back in here, I wanted to talk a little bit about 511 data. So you can see here, we have 511 road closed data. I have this filtered to a couple of days, but you can see this incident came in here. So crash blocking the exit ramp, seek alternate route. So you can see here, this is one that came in not too long ago, actually. And so again, these are real-time traffic or construction or whatever it is. These are all coming from every single state's 511 road information. That's all in here. One last point I wanted to mention is okay, we've got all this data, we've got all this information. So what do we do with it? So I don't have live information of this, but I have some photos, some screenshots that I want to talk about. So with this, you can start layering other technology in. So we talked about just the overall fleet movement apps in the Esri platform. We had a crew test out tracker because we wanted to know where the fleets were. They wanted to know where their fellow fleets were, and the logistics of their company wanted to know where they were. So oftentimes we have, or they already have tracking capability, but we tested this out just to see. So this was done in Hurricane Laura. And you can see here the purple route, just like I talked about a few seconds ago. Then we also have this green area. And this green area here is actually a track of one of the trucks. And so this is real time. It updates every 30 to 60 seconds. You can see here some more. And so you can see as these folks were going, where they exited, you can get all kinds of information about the device that's tracking that. So here you can see where they've come off the exit, stopped for fuel. So why is that important? So once you start to layer in tracking capabilities with all of the information that I talked about here, the declarations, maybe some weather watches and warnings and advisories, things that are coming through, you can start to have a communication line. So for example, if a crew is approaching Georgia's border and they need state police to escort them through the way stations, you can automatically get notified, hey, we're an hour within the border, please send someone to meet us. Or we can call an EOC or whatever that looks like. Hey, there's a tornado in your path 5 miles down the road. So once you know the exact location of where you are, combined with all of this other information, you can start to get a really intelligent picture of what that looks like. So I'll be thinking about how this might relate to your own specific cases. So, hey, there's a generator placed nearby and I need to pick something up, or there's some supplies that we can pick up on the way, or whatever that means. So it really starts to give you that intelligent picture and really start to help the fleets as they move in whatever direction that would be. So then one additional thing I wanted to talk about is how we're starting to capture this information. So there's a tool in the Esri framework called Snapshot. And what we did throughout Hurricane Elsa was we did snapshots of the information 3 times a day. You can do it anytime you want. That's just what we chose. But what it does is it takes a literal snapshot of anything that you have in the map and any status. So Tom mentioned about the open and closed data. So that's like the hotels and the food and the fuel that I talked about a minute ago. It can take the status. So you have an actual real time, at the time, picture of whatever it was that you looked at. So that could be, in this case, the hurricane path and power outages. So for example, if I just jump around, so this is just a sequence of all of the different snapshots, but you can see here, here's a declaration. So if I scroll through here, we can see here's the declaration when the declaration came in. And again, this is the declaration order, the PDF. Then the next snapshot that we took had Georgia declared. Again, the path is changing. So it just is a really nice way for exercises or for situation reports or after action reports, or just to see what might be going on. You can track what, anything that's in here. So what the weather was, what the wind direction and speed was, what the flooding levels were. And also you can start to look at historic information. So is this same storm, similar size, similar thing, is it going to affect us in a similar way? Maybe, maybe not, but maybe we can start to predict and make more intelligent decisions based on that. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tom.
Carrie, thank you. This just gives you an idea of the first SICE app that we've developed from the information to answer the question is, how can I get our fleets from point A to point B the fastest, number one. Number two is how can I coordinate with states along the way, okay, as well as the destination point? Well, this was developed originally for a use case in the electric sector, but now it's the supply chain using this: food, fuel, communication utilities. And we've been collectively, Chris Vaughn at FEMA and Greg and Rob Glenn, a bunch of people, along with organizations, the NGOs, when these storms hit, we're all working on the same piece. And many times I get 6 or 7 emails with the same information. And that's what we're trying to, how do we lower that load? How can we let the states know what the private sector sees? So that's really the purpose of this first app, is to synchronize efforts. So the data is there. The private sector has been collecting this information since 2013, and they have mapped literally every hotel, every bank, every store. I mean, it's a lot, but it's worthless if we can't align it. And I think what you saw here is a way we can align it to a specific problem. We don't want data that's not along the route. We have that. We don't need that here. The second thing is road closures in a multi-state environment. So through a partnership with several organizations, state DOTs, we now aggregated the 511 data across the country in one layer. That's real time. And that's important because when in a disaster zone, the most reliable information comes from the state 511 sites or the EOCs or both. And so Carrie mentioned that. What I'm really excited about is the future of this is really going to bring in the unstructured data that just isn't shared anywhere. Texts, cell phone calls, sit reps, declarations and waivers, things that happen all the time that we can now share up to federal agencies, across to states, and more importantly, to the private sector folks that are using this as a way to expedite movement and get real-time information back and forth. This is not public. This is a private, service, if you will. We're working on kind of a public version of this, but the data being shared in there is sensitive, and the private sector doesn't want that open to the general public in some use cases. Some it doesn't really matter. So Carrie, just a question from an Esri perspective. Can you talk for a minute about some of the other dashboards that we're talking about? I know you've done it for other customers where we can give, this kind of an operational tool, but there's an executive version, right, that we've been talking about. And maybe if you can't show, maybe you can just speak to that. So if I'm an executive, I don't need to know the map and search in, but I just want to know a snapshot. How many closed facilities, how many power outages? Can you speak to that just for a minute from a concept standpoint? I know we're getting ready to push that out the door here.
Yeah, of course. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the idea behind the Esri platform is you have data once and you can put it in many places. So think of it as like the center of a wheel with many spokes coming off of it. And so with this, it's no different. So we have this data in this application, and this is from a more of an operational standpoint. Think of, I mentioned your crews with the actual app on their phone, or logistics in an office of a utility trying to help plan resources and things. But as Tom mentioned, maybe you don't want to know that. So take it one level higher, you can have different visualization tools, and whatever that means and looks like. We're still working through all of that. But operations dashboard is a really good one. And basically it has cards or indicators with just some numbers and some real high level information. So perhaps total power outages, or perhaps open facilities versus closed, or road closures, or, whatever is is of interest to you. The information's probably here. I mean, we've got tons of data in here. It's just a matter of how we would want to look at that. So those are some of the other products that we're working through on the fleet movement committee, and just trying to get some additional support for across the different kinds of users.
Well, thank you, Carrie. I want to invite Greg and Chris for comment. Chris and I talk fairly frequently, and one of the things when the Lifeline initiative was established after the 2017 hurricane season, the idea was, how do we synchronize these efforts? And I love the Lifeline construct. Chris and I spoke, and we kind of share the same vision, is how can we work together, right? So we're not all replicating efforts. And I just, Chris, I know you're going to speak in a minute, but I want to invite you for any comments or things that kind of down the road, where you see things going together from a public-private sharing perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's great to be with everybody today. So I'll just give a quick segue into the lifeline sectors. Do you want me to go into the topic now, or do you want me to tee it up very, very briefly?
No, either way.
All right. Well, let me let me actually start. You know, this is for me. I've been at FEMA for 10 years. Got here in 2010, so I guess 11 years now. And it really, a lot of this actually started back when in the 2010 era, 2011, when we started talking about PPD 8. A big major component of this was whole community. It was really a sea change and a shift in the thinking, especially within emergency management, that it really is the whole community responding to an incident. It's not just the federal government. It's not just the quote unquote professional emergency response community. And there was and continues to be a significant push to integrate with the private sector, right? Why are we, FEMA, going to deploy water bottles when there's water bottles sitting in the parking lot of a large, I'm sorry, let me try that one more time. Why would we deploy water bottles into the parking lot of a large box store that's fully open and operational? So there's really always been this constant dialogue and integration of private sector information and data. And so, you know, Tom mentioned one of our main groups over at FEMA is led by a gentleman known as Rob Glenn, private sector office. And so there's a lot of integration and connection points. So real quick, let me just give you a real high level of how we're approaching this. We do view this in a whole community, private, public, connection point, this concept of lifeline sectors. So Laura, I think next slide, hopefully, I think. Do we have a overview of the lifelines or no?
You have them.
I have them.
Yeah, we need to have you share, I guess.
All right, well, I don't have that slide. So I'm just going to tell you real quick what those 7 lifelines are. They are health and medical, and that really speaks to the health and medical, hospitals, nursing homes, health and medical, safety and security, which is our urban search and rescue teams, making sure that the site is actually secure. Transportation, you saw a little bit here about making sure that we understand what the status of the roads are. Obviously understanding the 511 perspective is critical. Power, which is emergency power, gas station, the status of the energy lifeline. Hazardous material, making sure we're not sending our first responders into a situation that is dangerous, obviously. Let's see, health and medical, safety and security, power, transportation, hazardous material. Oh Lord, you put me on the spot here.
That's all right.
2 more. I'll get back to you.
I'll pull up a graphic here.
Thanks. Communications, that is probably one of the top ones. Communications and power are always the top ones. So yeah, we're constantly trying to iterate and pull on the strings. There's one of the biggest challenges that we obviously have is the lack of national data sets that are live. So that's something that we are always trying to work on. One of the data services that we get from Tom is this the stores that are open or closed, and that actually gives a really good perspective of impact. We layer that in with the other layers that you've kind of seen here with the open closed status of roads, the open closed status of the stores, the integration of the power, whether or not the power is on or off. And Tom's right, there's a unique mix of data that's open and transparent. There are data sets that are secured mainly for a licensing perspective. There are some data sets that are just sensitive, and so that's really where we have this connection point. So back over to you, Tom.
Yeah, and Chris, part of the thinking here is this is an iterative effort, right? There's no one and done here. right? This is constantly changing and evolving. And I was just thinking that, could you comment for a minute on how you get a lot of partners working with you in the process, right? And I was just curious if you can discuss, you talked about the principles behind the lifelines and open Organet. You're using Esri there as well. Can you talk about the technical, how you do it technically, and how has Esri helped and supported you in that effort?
Yeah, I would really actually chalk it up maybe in two veins. One is relationship building. You know, a lot of this actually has to come to the one-to-one connections and establishing a relationship and a rapport and trust and getting that information flowing. And then the other side of the house is technical. Let me speak a lot to that relationship bit right there. It has taken us years, quite frankly, to work with data providers. When I first got here, like I said, 11 years ago, much of the data was being passed around either on Excel spreadsheets or PDFs, worse yet, PDFs. And I think a lot of the disaster related information, because it's just in time and it's very much a knee-jerk reaction, people will pass information on those PDFs. So, I mean, I commend you for what you're doing. You're taking the PDFs and you're converting that knowledge into a technology solution that can then be integrated with other technology platforms. It wasn't that long ago, circa 2013-14, when most of the state DOT 511 information was shared through a Google Docs. That's great. I commend them for making it more public, but it literally would just suck our time away, where we would have to go in and try to parse that information in real time. And so I really think the community has moved tremendously towards live RESTful endpoints. And so we do use Esri. We use a number of other technology platforms as well. We actually do try to become, are really working hard towards being technology agnostic. And what I mean by that is we have folks that like Esri dashboards, but we just as equally like folks that like Tableau dashboards or Power BI dashboards. The key is really those open, RESTful APIs that allow for data integration and sharing. So you can present it in numerous different formats for different purposes.
And let me pull on that thread for just a minute. I know Carrie Trapazzo works with our GIS committee, chaired by Carrie Hicks from Duke Energy. And that putting things into a REST API was a big thing from day one, right? And I think Carrie, from maybe you just provide a comment here. I think, isn't that the strategy the SICE group wants to use? Is everything coming in ends up? Can you talk to that for just a second?
Sure, yeah. So following on Chris's comments, we recognize people are using all sorts of things. We talked a little bit about unstructured data, but take that and just transfer that to some other system where your data is. Tom mentioned WebEOC, that's just one of thousands, and it doesn't even need to be crisis management, whatever that looks like, however that looks and feels, wherever that data is, we're really trying to, as Chris mentioned, get it to a point, a REST endpoint or an API connector, or just some standardization, even if it's coming in as flat JSON or just flat information, bringing that all together to give, that one place so that people don't have to have 10 different screens with all these different computer programs open, or whatever that looks like. Just bring it in, have people being able to make decisions based on things from other places and not just the Esri platform. The Esri platform is the container we're used to display it in this case, but again, we're looking at all different ways of bringing that data together so that it makes sense and decisions can be made against it.
So Chris, to your point, right? We like, I think we all are on the same boat, as the information ought to be interoperable, right? And I think that's a kind of a fundamental principle. I know you all use, we certainly have to use it in the public-private environment as well. So how do you see, big picture here, how do you see efforts like the SICE? I mean, the SICE is one. There's other organizations doing similar things. We're not, the SICE is not the Black Death Star of data, right? So it doesn't want to be. How do you see, like, efforts from the private sector like this integrating with FEMA's Lifeline initiative here, as far as information where they can collaborate on and synchronize that, if you will, either for disaster response or damage assessment? How do you see the private sector and the SICE type things working into your framework?
I have two immediate thoughts on that, but before I did that, I had to quickly Google what the seventh lifeline was, and holy cow, it's the most pertinent one to this whole conversation. The seventh lifeline is food, water, and shelter. How in the world? It must have been so principal on my mind. I just blew right through it.
No, that's fine.
But I mean, that's a good segue of how we use it. I want to go back to the whole concept that, it's been an iterative progression of getting unstructured data, typically shared through Excel spreadsheets or PDFs, which is literally I don't know, many words. It just picked the wrong approach. That is a travesty. I mean, that's really what happened to us in COVID. People were reporting via Excel. I mean, that's really what we all default to. If you get into a big disaster, people, if they don't have the right system set up for information sharing, people naturally default to Excel, which is terrible, because then you can't really have an iterative, editing, experience where I'm contributing a little bit, you're contributing a little bit, we're really sharing information back and forth in real time. So where I see this happening, or where I've had the opportunity to see a lot of progress occur, is through these relationships, through these iterative conversations. During a big disaster, once again, some of the data sets that are shared openly, actually, big box stores start to share those store closed, open, closed status. And the geospatial community, I represent not only FEMA, but I'm speaking a little bit here on behalf of the emergency management community from a geospatial perspective. They'll grab it. We are very, very quick to copy and paste and throw into our dashboards. Well, that just helps to promote or promulgate overall situational awareness of an ongoing situation. I recall back in Hurricane Maria, we did have a open closed status of a large box store. They were making that open and public. They've been working on that, and I'm sorry I can't say the specific name of the box store, but that box store, big box store, real big, has been working on that for years, and it took them a while to get to this whole point of an open API. I think, in fact, their data set is served as a GeoJSON. Well, that is picked up, by this GIS emergency management network very quickly. We're all on LinkedIn. We all see each other. We're sharing data back and forth very, very quickly, in the hopes that influences senior level decision making. And it does. It really does. And it actually drives innovation, because if one private sector industry sees how another one is doing it, they want to get on that same bandwagon. So I don't know if I'm blabbing. I feel like I'm blabbing a little bit here, but we're on the right path. I'm trying to offer encouragement that I've seen what bad looks like, and that was about 4 to 5 years ago. I've seen the promised land, in the sense that we are really making tremendous strides, because the more that people get on this bandwagon of information sharing, getting more towards structured data, making it more repetitive and more consistent, the better we're all going to be from a whole community perspective, and supporting this concept that we call the lifelines, which is breaking down a lot of the traditional silos that we've had in the emergency management arena.
Good. And Chris, last question is, where we've touched on this a little bit about where you'd like to see this go. I know the vision of sharing data is great. But you and I talked just recently about, getting specific, right, on a specific big fur ball problem. And I know in the electric sector, as well as pretty much everywhere else, the first issue in the response is what's broken, damage assessment, right? I know there's a big passion of yours. We've started down that road with a couple of utilities and states. And I wanted just to comment, I know Esri's released some new information about damage assessments and so forth. From FEMA's perspective, how do you see, what information do you see you guys can aggregate, right, from that? And like the private sector, we'll have the private sector perspectives on this later, but I'm just curious to see from a damage assessment, what is the information you all need, and where do you feel you can get it from, and where do you need help?
So what Tom's speaking of is truly a passion of mine. For everybody else on the line, I've been in this community for the better part of 16 years. I cut my teeth in Katrina, and the same thing happens every single disaster. And you've all seen it. You've all been a part of it. You're probably some of the folks that were driving down, I-95, chasing that disaster, where you've got 75 power utility trucks just chunking down the road to get down to an impacted area. There are thousands and thousands of people, numerous organizations that stand up and respond to a disaster. Arguably, with the advent of mobile technology, there's this explosion of all of these armies of volunteers that go down, and the opportunity to better collect what you're seeing on the ground in real time. I think we're making tremendous progress on that. I think we still got a long way to go, especially from just an awareness. I mean, if you could really outfit the nonprofits, the Baptists and the Episcopalians and the Salvation Armies and the Red Crosses and pick them all, just tell me what you see. I mean, that's basically from a response perspective. If you're there, tell me what you see, right? So, and that's what we're starting to see with these power utility companies that Tom is speaking of. They're already there. They're already driving up and down the street. Take a picture, text someone, let me know what you see, because if you don't do that, we are doomed to repeat that process times 1,000. We will send people out on the ground. Unfortunately, FEMA still has large portions of our field response entities still out with pencil and paper. No matter my hardest advocacy for using a smartphone, we still love our pencil and paper because we do. So we're trying to change that perspective. We're trying to change that community. I do see a lot of this really changing. I think a lot of it's actually going to change for this hurricane season because, if you see somebody out on the ground doing things with a mobile application, chances are you're going to start asking questions of what does that mean? And the more people that are doing it, the more the technology is integrated into the response, and the better it's going to be for the whole community, the echelons that support.
So, Chris, let me pull on that thread for just a minute. Carrie Trapazzo just sent me a note in a great example. So maybe Carrie, if you can share your screen. But Chris, one of the things I wanted to is there's apps out there now. The technology is coming a long way, right? I know Esri has an app now that we're going to test for exactly this purpose, right? I see something, I can put it right in the app, boom, it goes right in the dashboard. This is there. It's just getting people aware of it. It'd be great if both public and private government industry can do this together, right? So we have trusted allies putting up information. We're all looking at the same thing. Carrie's got an example of exactly what you're talking about. Carrie, why don't you just share this real quick, and we'll move on to our next topic.
Sure. So following along the lines of what Chris and Tom were talking about, this is in the fleet movement application. So basically, these are disaster photos that are put out as close to real time as they can and are being compiled. It's put out by NAPSIG. But you can see here, it's talking about the location, where the picture was found. Then I'll actually click the link in a second and show you where it was found, what the damage is, the date and time of the photo. So there's a bunch in here from earlier this year when the tornadoes went through Alabama. But then it also talks about the lifeline that it's associated with, if it's vetted, et cetera. So if I come up here to the link, it actually takes me out to the tweet. That's my internet. I apologize. My internet just dropped for a second. It takes you to the tweet, or in this case, a picture of what's going on. So the Twitter feed actually just a few minutes ago, if it would have loaded, had a drone video flying over top of this same exact house. And so that's where we can start to see, the folks on the ground, the fleets. I mentioned tracking, earlier with the demo. As the fleets are driving, they see a picture along the road, whether that's flooding or something, something like this. It's just not going to let me load Twitter for some reason, but something like this, where something is damaged. The sooner we can get this information, the better. And as Tom mentioned, Esri just put out a whole new solution that's helping this. So there's a mobile app that you can tie right into all of this, and it follows all of FEMA's standard questions that they ask. So just a couple of examples here where there are some photos in the application now. That's historic, but we're hoping to work with some groups to try to get this more real time, as people are seeing it on the ground.
And so, Chris, I know this hurricane season, I know the private sector wants to work closely with you. FEMA is a great aggregator of some of this stuff, right? What we're trying to do is help the states, find a way the states can do that. So we're all looking at the same photos from the same sources. Some of the ones we may have are going to be too sensitive, but there's certainly a ton of them we can all share and get synchronization, and it just helps everybody, right? FEMA needs information, and they should have it so that they can make their decisions. And as somebody at FEMA said, I forget who was, do no harm, right? The federal government is going to do nothing. They're not going to sit there and watch. They're going to take action. And so private sector wants them to coordinate that. Private sector's got to be able to provide some information to FEMA and vice versa. So we're looking to test that with you all this hurricane season. So, okay, let's jump on to our third topic. So Greg McShane is, I'll let Greg introduce himself. He's been part of the SICE working group now for a couple of years. And so Greg, the topic here is, how can SICE and private sector basically support kind of the national critical function framework for DHS? And what is that? And kind of we'll get into that in this topic. So Greg, go ahead and introduce yourself if you would, and we can jump into it.
Yeah, sure, Tom. Good morning. I'm going to keep my camera off because my connection has been going in and out. So hopefully you guys can hear me okay. But at some point I'll turn it on and hopefully it won't crash. But really great discussion from both Carrie and Chris. It's just unbelievable how far we've come with some of the discussions and efforts we've been working for the last couple of years. Not, specific more so to All Hazards Consortium, the solving the operational problems, the use case approach is just we're really been ahead of the game. And when we start talking about like critical functions, our division within the CISA is the National Risk Management Center. I work specifically in the Integrated Operations Division. I support our CISA Central, our operations, which includes our cyber, physical desks, as well as our service desk. And it also includes our Intel subdivision. We have operational readiness continuity, operational planning, and then also now our regional operations, which includes all of our regional offices across the United States. So it's part of the whole CISA 2020 reorg. We are all one. We will all be operating under one watch umbrella. So it's a really a great step in the right direction. And things that we've been struggling, with some of the silos in the prior years. So with that, I did post in our website a link to the national critical functions if you want to follow along. I'm going to do my best to talk along this. Like I said, our NRMC, National Risk Management Center folks have led the charge on this effort. And if you are a continuity planner or business continuity planner or continuity of operations planner, this is right in your strike zone. It goes through and identifies all your operational or your critical functions or essential functions that support your operations. It's part of that whole business impact assessment, mapping of your critical functions or essential functions to your people, your processes, your tools. It's the same concept that we're using here. And really what it does, it's a great approach above and beyond the traditional approach we've been taking with critical infrastructure, where you're now just identifying your critical infrastructure, but you're also identifying the functions that support all that critical infrastructure, keeping it up and running. And it bleeds beyond just the government. It's very much integrated into the private sector. Again, reasons why we're working with the All Hazards Consortium is to really close the gap on the public and private sector efforts on these areas. And it's a work in progress, and it's a huge lift, but this is really another good step in the right direction to really make it a feasible, capable, resilient program, to help us, defend our, it's the security of the United States, the national economic security, and public or health or safety of those things. So, like I said, it brings the private sector, government agencies, and other key stakeholders together to help identify, analyze, prioritize, and manage the most significant risks, whether they're cyber, physical, supply chain, or more. And this is really the first, what I've seen from CISA, and really diving down into the challenges that we're having across the board, whether it's something on the supply chain. And like I said, the All Hazards Consortium, with what I'm seeing with what Carrie's been presenting and Chris has been discussing, really are all integrated with this. And so we're ahead of the game with this on the All Hazards Consortium front. It's all that operational use case approach, getting the right people, the right processes, the right tools and technologies in place so you can better share information. We can all get on the same page for situational awareness. It just all really kind of integrates into those types of challenges moving forward. So with that, the national critical functions, there's a whole fact sheet on this, and it really dives into some of the different organized 4 areas we have are connect, distribute, manage, and supply. The connections are really very much cyber communications focused, where you're sending and receiving data. It's all that internet connectivity, those types of things. The distribution part is the methods which allow the movement of goods, people, and utilities inside and outside the United States. For example, electric distribution, cargo transportation, and then, like I said before, some of the processes part. The management processes are all key to making this work. So whether it's on the national security or the public health and safety, hazardous material during national emergencies, those types of things. And then lastly, the supply parts of this. It's the management of your goods and services that secure our economy. It's the clean water, housing, research, those types of things. So a lot of this started back in the day with our National Infrastructure Protection Plan, but really ties nicely into the efforts and builds on that to really allow that more holistic cross-cutting risks associated with dependencies, interdependencies, and some of those cascading impacts across all sectors. So, with that said, Tom, I think you wanted to talk a little bit more about the data behind that.
Yeah, I know one of early on when the private sector was working with government, I remember somebody provided a data set that was very helpful. And the chair at the time, John Shaner, the chair of the fleet work group, when asked about, hey, how do we get this? What came back was, well, this is a prototype. We'll have it ready in a couple of years. And I remember the private sector being like, well, how do we, thank you very much, but that doesn't do us any good. How do we know what data is operationally ready for us to use right now, right? And what is down the road? So there was Karen Moe, formerly with NASA, was part of the work group, and she proposed through the ESIP, the Earth Science Information Partnership. The ESIP Federation is a confederation of 100 plus universities that work on a lot of data. When Karen brought forth the idea of using NASA's operational readiness level model, which was a 9-step, every part of a program is labeled a 1 through 9. So we scaled that down to 1 through 4, but the operational readiness level standard, every piece of data the private sector has in the sites has gone through this model. If it's a 1 or 2, it's ready to go. If it's a 3 or 4, it's okay, but proceed at your own risk kind of thing. And that ORL standard was developed by the the work group in partnership with ESIP, and Greg was part of that as well. But it really raised the bar for the data quality within the sites, right? Because everybody wants to know, can I make a decision on this dashboard or not? And Greg, I wanted you to talk about, because at the same time, DHS and of course maybe FEMA is doing the same thing, is how do we know the data is ready for me to make a decision on or not? What's the quality of that data? Maybe you can talk, Greg, about that initiative within DHS.
Yes.
Quality, I think.
Yeah, sure. So a couple initiatives going on in our chief technology office. We now have a chief data officer, and this is across the board within DHS as well, because they're working the same problems or same challenges on the data front, which have been maturing over a number of years. So from what I can see, so I serve on the data council as a IOD representative, and it's interesting to see the level of effort that's been going into this on the data front. So just to take a quick step back, but this all really ties nicely into, that use case approach. It's identifying the right people, the right processes, the right tools, technology, but also add to that, it's the right or best data that feeds into those tools and technology and operations part. So we're tackling those damage assessments, lodging, fuel availability, restoration, restrictions, fleet movement data. Those things are really key and important, and we've been working those for several years because they just may not be ready for prime time. We may not have the right data, or the data may not be structured in a format we can use and leverage into a tool. We saw that with our commercial routing application that we rolled out during COVID. It was a data source that was being generated by National Governors Association, which fed our CRA tool. Again, that was great, and a couple other data feeds were fitting into that. But when the NGA kind of turns that data off, the tool becomes kind of compromised. Again, the tool is still operational, but how can we keep building off that tool with additional data sources, or identifying where we can get those sources, and in a legal framework, licensing, whether we're buying that or somebody's giving it to us, those types of things we have to hurdle around. So with that said, on the CISA side, we are going through a complete relook at our program. They're reinventorying a lot of our data sets. We are categorizing those. It's understanding and defining that data sets. We're cataloging it. The data dictionary, or the metadata, the data within the data that we're identifying for the tools, current tools we have, or the data that we have. It's creating those data value standards, so that we're all on the same page when we're talking about an incident or an event. Is it a cyber event? Is it a physical event? Defining those so we're all on the same page. Even identifying those authoritative or trusted data sources, and that gets into some of the things that you're working, Tom, on the operational readiness level, in measuring that data quality or data confidence that goes into the equation. We're not in the business. This is not in the business of ranking data, obviously for certain reasons. But we can leverage where the SICE and AAC is working in identifying and understanding the level of confidence behind that, whether it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, red, yellow, green, however you measure those types of things on the data side. So again, when you have a dashboard or a tool capability that's fed by certain data, you need to understand, where's that data coming from? Is it updated weekly, monthly, yearly? In making those types of decisions, when you're looking at that status board or dashboard, or you're feeding your model or tool, and it it's kicking out an actual result. And what does that result mean? When the boss is asking, what's your level of confidence with that recommendation based off of the information, you need to be prepared to know and understand where that data came from and how you came to the actual result or recommendation that you're making. So, with that said, we're also, identifying what those data gaps are. There may be data out there that is just the best data we have, and it's a ORL 4, but it is the best data that we have. So, that goes into the equation of how you know and understand, those elements of the data sources. So that covers a lot of it. We're working other efforts. We piloted, with the AAC, a tool called GeoCollaborate. It feeds a lot of the geospatial dashboards directly from the sites into our own CISA Gateway situation awareness dashboard, which is live right on our watch floor. So, and it is accessible to folks via mobile app and things of that nature. So, again, we're moving forward on a lot of these fronts. How we can better share the data needs to be defined. We have a lot of restrictions and protocols. We have protected critical infrastructure information. We have, chemical information that's got to be restricted. So getting through those hurdles and best practices and guidelines, our challenges on DHS's part when it comes to actually sharing that information. We do a lot of it the old school way via email and SneakerNet. We are side by side with FEMA at the National Response Coordinating Center, and a lot of this has gone a bit hybrid. So we're now virtual. So again, challenges going along with how we do that. How do we do briefings and how do we share information are all on the table, and we're working towards what that next level of maturity is. So back to you, Tom. If you have any other specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, one of the questions that the private sector have been working on is how do you see the private sector sites framework supporting and integrating in with the national critical function initiatives? For example, damage assessment or data research, or maybe the example of the commercial route assistance app. There's been a number of things going on, but the question is, how do you see that working with CISA and the critical?
Yeah, and Tom, when it comes to the national critical functions, those are high level functions, and where we see the integration parts is working with the All Hazards Consortium. You guys are great, and we're fantastic at that operational problem solving. What is that use case that we're trying to tackle that rolls onto? It's kind of that sub function or that essential support activity that we're doing to support that overall national critical function. Whether it's supply chain impact, the supply chain was a real big on the radar during COVID on how we do that, and we solved the problem with the CRA app, those types of things, and how we can build off of that. We're really after the same, like Chris was mentioning, we're dealing with the same issues and challenges that we've got every time a hurricane rolls through. It's the movement of goods and resources. It's the declarations, the restrictions associated with those declarations, and it's how do we get things cross state, and dealing with those types of support functions that we're at. And AAC is great on the fleet movement, whether it's electric utilities going from state to state to the host state to support response recovery of an event, and those are the things that we see as extremely supportive of the national critical functions, and where we as CISA, the government, extend into the private sector. We're on a lot of other fronts too, but the All Hazards Consortium is the first on the list that we call for operational problem solving. And hey, can we tackle some of these specific issues? Like we mentioned earlier, it expands beyond fuel availability, fuel restoration, lodging. I'm trying to think some of the other ones. Tom, what are some of the other ones we're working? Pre-staging.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting ones is reducing fiber cuts, right? That was a big problem with Hurricane Michael. How do we coordinate comms and electric with states and reduce the fiber cut issue, right? That's a big initiative.
Yeah.
I think another one came out of North Carolina was the partnering with big box stores as like ad hoc staging areas, right? So that was a very quick process workaround that we tested with Walmart in North Carolina, and it ended up being very, very successful. So there's 100 of these use cases that have been worked on by the work group. But again, they're all around problems, right? Every disaster creates a problem, and then how are we going to fix that? I think Chris, you said it. How do we not make this same mistake because we all might know how to do it, but we're not going to be here forever. So we move on because of an election or retirement, and new folks come in and don't have the experience or the back, or the perspectives that we do. And here we go, we repeat the same mistakes, right? So we're hoping working together now, we can at least solidify some of that as well. Last question, Greg, is how do you see private sector and government? A lot's happened positive, I must say, since 2017, right? The trend is certainly in the right direction, as Chris mentioned. How do you see that going forward, if you will, for data sharing initiatives in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tom. And on the data sharing front is always been a challenge of, what is the data that you can share? What data can't you share? I think I touched on that a little bit, but we have those feeds coming in a geospatial format into our situation awareness tool. So a great first step, but and that's in a secure environment, which is a huge win for us, and a bit more of a sense of security in folks that join the SICE, in knowing and understanding where that data is and who sees that data. And we got that nice honeycomb kind of compartmentation, role-based type access for the SICE. And those are some of the things that we're working. When it comes to the data, we're all trying to solve the same problems, create the same dashboards. If there's a way that we can leverage the SICE to create some of those common, dashboards or capabilities across the board, and we can leverage that. Not always do we need to have that, but we need to take that and overlay that with some of our tools and information that we have, and then we need to do that vice versa. The challenge is what information and data can we share, and then what information can't we share. So it just gets into that level of sensitivity of what those are, and creating those best practices and guidelines so that we can do that and do it in a way that there's no spillage of information that doesn't need to be getting out into the wrong hands and things of that nature. So again, where we like the SICE is and it's in a protected environment. There's things that we can leverage and get access to with the states. You have great relationships with the states, and a lot of the membership from the private sector, with EEI, a lot of the utilities is just phenomenal. So hats off to what you've done on the member side. You have those relationships, and not everybody in government has those. So that's where we need to really leverage the All Hazards Consortium. So
great, thanks.
Back to you, Tom.
Good, Greg, thank you. Laura, I think we're going to end early, but I know we got a couple of questions here. So let me turn it back to you, and we can maybe jump into some of the questions that I don't know how many came in. I missed some. I'm sure we have a couple.
Yeah, sure. Just before I get into what we have so far, just wanted to remind our listeners that if you have any other questions, go ahead and put it either in the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll see if we can get to it. We do have a few. And I think this would be for either Chris or Greg, how does FEMA and DHS get and/or share information with states during disasters?
Chris, you want to jump on that one first, or?
Yeah, sure. No, I'll take that. At least from my perspective, we probably the best example that comes to mind. And this is not an endorsement. It's just how we've done it in the recent past. FEMA has an ArcGIS Online account. We call it the Geospatial Resource Center. A lot of what we've talked about today is based in Esri technology. This is not endorsing a specific company, but just you've heard from several partners and people that sharing data openly and transparently helps. And so in support of the COVID-19, both the initial response to that, trying to track what the impacts were, as well as the vaccination efforts of where we were, we stood up this COVID-19 hub site. Hub is a technology offered by Esri. And in support of that, I think we had all 50 states and numerous private sector, public sector entities mic'd up. We had over 700 COVID dashboards, and they ranged from everything of tracking not only the case counts of what was impacted, but there was some real innovative things that occurred using, once again, mobile applications to track resources and resource deployment. So you kind of had this whole echelon of support of kind of having that bird's eye view of the overall impact that COVID was having and playing that out in real time. Then you also had people that were from the logistics community pushing PPE to the right locations at the right time. And then you had the states and the locals on the ground, as it were, requesting, all integrated in these various different platforms. And the key component there is, open APIs, RESTful services, and you can integrate a lot very quickly. So the technology, hands down, is there. Not an endorsement for a specific company like Esri, but just generally speaking, the technology does exist. It's that relationship building to know where to send that data, where to send that information, so that the broadest community can have access and know kind of what others are doing in that same similar space.
Yeah, Chris, just let me add to that from a CISA perspective. So CISA has what they call protective security advisors in every state. There's multiple folks in some of these states, depending on how big the state is. They usually, depending on the relationship with the state, if there's an actual event, are co-located at the state EOCs with a PSA at there, and they should have that relationship with that regional office. We built out many of these offices. Some of the PSAs work virtual, through COVID and prior to COVID, but now we are building out many of our regional offices. So they are maturing quite quickly, and those are an excellent avenue. If you don't have that, I can always get you that PSA or regional office contact information to you. And aside from that, we do have the HIS and CI page. We post a lot of our reporting if you have access to that, and then obviously some of our just normal distribution lists with some of our customers and things of that nature are avenues to share with some of the states. So.
All right, Chris and Greg, thank you so much. Another question here. I love this question. As the app gets more usage and exposure, how do you plan on soliciting feedback regarding performance and data sets to ensure that the feedback is heard and the tool is collaborative?
I wish I had the answer for that. It's a great question. Noted. That'll be up to the SICE work group. Right now, it's I don't say it's a teenager, it's a toddler, right? Not quite an infant, but it's a toddler. And that is a great question. Don't have the answer, but I'm sure the metrics behind that, as this app was beginning to be looked at, we had 17 interviews with different companies and got their feedback on, okay, this is what it will do, this is what it won't do. Because a lot of people had ideas for different types of apps, but we were focused on this one. Let's get this one done and working and operational. And we got great feedback from them for the current fleet movement app, because it was really very focused. We started with electric because the states asked us, let's get electric on faster. That'll help everybody. Well, sure enough, the same benefits were to the states and everyone else. So we will be monitoring that. And I made a note, Laura, that's a great question. I think how does it impact the private sector section? How does it impact safety? How does it impact speed? How does it impact coordination with state and local government as well as FEMA? I mentioned life safety, and the last one is cost, right? During Sandy, we estimated about $1 million an hour was the cost of that mobilization. $1 million an hour, okay? And that was a big one. And so if you can shave an hour delay off each state, that's a big impact from a cost standpoint. But more importantly, getting them there sooner means the power's on Wednesday instead of Saturday. So that's another metric, is how fast can we get it there? So great question, noted, and we'll take that back to the private sector and the work group.
Thank you so much for that question. Thank you, Tom. Carrie, you showed photographs early, damaged photographs. Does the app have the ability to display other photos or videos such as DoD cameras?
Yes, so I actually have an example here and can show, let me just share my screen very quickly. We don't have camera integration into the Fleet Movement app yet. It's something that has been discussed. I did want to just mention that any kind of cameras like CCTV, or if we've got traffic cameras, or if we have partners who we can bring their cameras in through an API, this is how the camera information could potentially come in. So this is real time as we're looking at it right now. These are live cameras from Maryland. So this is just open data that's out there. And I just wanted to show you quickly, they can be brought in as points where you can actually click on something and see the information. So for example, if I go down here to Tampa, here's a whole bunch of cameras there. That's not what we're looking at on the sides here. I just threw this together quickly when I saw the question. But here we can come in and then see the live camera feed. And again, my internet, when I'm presenting with my camera, doesn't like to load. Oh, there it loaded. So this is live traffic as we go. So that is something we have discussed. We don't have it implemented yet, but that's how it could look once we get a little bit further down the road.
And let me pull on that thread, Carrie, for just a minute. The camera data is pretty ubiquitous. I mean, a lot of the states have excellent coverage for that. And in our initial discussions about integrating cameras into the fleet movement process, the private sector asked, well, what problem is it solving? That we struggle with more data, more data, more data. And the operator saying, for what purpose? What do we need it for? Well, so it kind of went on hold, but just recently it came back. It's extremely valuable in the impacted areas, maybe not along the route, but it really is helpful getting to know, what am I driving into? What are my people moving towards? And a video camera, if it works, the trick was, keeping the bandwidth narrow. And I know I wish John Contestable was on the phone with us. He does a lot of this work in compression of video through a company was called Skyline Engineering. But I think the live video feed is going to be easy to get, but I think it'll be more prolific here within the app, probably in the next couple of months. So good question.
All right, Chris, where can we learn more about FEMA's Lifeline initiatives?
Yeah, sure. No, great question. You can get the real answer because I stumbled at the beginning. That's my fault, everybody. It's on community. It's FEMA.gov community lifelines. I'll post a link here in the chat box briefly, but just FEMA.gov, look up community lifelines. I'll get you the actual link here.
And Chris, this is really good. The fact that we're integrating your team into the dialogue, because the private sector, when they first saw the Lifeline piece, the companies say, well, they were having this discussion. Well, why do Lifelines relative to me? And one of the other utilities said, hey, those people are our employees. They need shelter, food, and housing. And many times the employees in the impacted area can't come to work. So they need new employees from other states to come in. It was really interesting how the private sector figured out relevance to the Lifeline that really hit home. So anyway, I wanted to share that with you. I didn't know if that feedback had reached you, but it was very important to the private sector because they're concerned about how do we not just protect our businesses and the local economies, but how do we protect our people? So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks, Chris. Carrie, will we be adding live drone feed capabilities to the app?
So as Tom mentioned earlier, that's something that we'll have to take back to the committee and see. Damage assessment, drones are becoming a bigger part of that. It's something that's been mentioned, but again, kind of like the cameras and things, that's way down the road as far as implementation. But potentially, depending on what the committee says and decides.
Laura, there is a use case underway. It's not out public yet, but a lot of the utilities have drones on their trucks, small. Now they're affordable, right? So some of the larger ones, and that information is really critical to inspect, lines and poles and things like that. They don't share that in the past, but we're looking at one application with one utility that would allow us. Could could we get a feed or a recorded snippet, if you will, of a feed for damage assessment? So they've said, yeah, that'd be interesting. Then their next question is, who's going to look at it, for how long, and for what purpose? Those are the three questions, right? If I share my data, who's going to look at it, for how long, and for what purpose? And their fear is that getting out to the media and it's dramatic, just getting it taken out of context, as is the government's part. But that's coming. I didn't realize the utilities had implemented drones for the way they have, many of the larger ones.
Yeah. And I'm loving all these suggestions. Carrie, here's another one. Can the app display real-time operating status of businesses?
I'm actually going to let you talk a little bit about that. So with the application, we do have a partner that is sharing status of some, and I'm going to let Tom describe that.
So briefly, during Sandy, we were working with a telecom company, Hughes Network Systems. They provide satellite dishes all over the world, do a lot of the military. And when Sandy struck, New Jersey and New York, who were on our board, came to us, hey, do you guys have any information that would help us know what is closed and what is open? It's a huge footprint of geographic coverage. So very quickly, we worked with Hughes, and it was a big legal thing because we were asking them for their customer database, basically. Their operations center was in Maryland. So we agreed, the consortium signed the agreement. We would take the liability off the table. We put it together a spreadsheet, we sent it out, FEMA got hold of it. And that data basically was monitoring the on-off status of the router, the data router on hundreds of thousands of sites, gas, hotel, fuel, lodging, and it was real time. And that data became the central planning data, as I was told from FEMA, for the first couple of days. And so we formalized that, and Chris and his GIS team are using that right now. We've opened that up for testing for them. So we're not going to monitor anything that is based on humans inputting, right? We want to monitor some type of digital connection that's always on or off, and we want to be notified. Now that's sensitive, it requires an agreement, it requires some dating with the company to build trust, right? But this year we're going to work with the food sector and talk with some larger companies. We've already had engagements with one. So we'll be able to monitor the status of the router, which is about a 90% accuracy to tell us, do they have power or not? Because when they lose power, the router goes down, or the data connection goes down. And if they don't have power, they can't pump gas or conduct business. So it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. And we've tested a number of different things that relied on human engineering to upload a spreadsheet or do it, tell us what's open or closed. But the private sector needs it real time. And so, yeah, the answer is yes, it's in there now. It's in the Fleet Work Group app now for about 350,000 locations, but we want to take that up to about 6 or 8 million over the next year.
Thanks, Tom. That's all the time we have for questions, but would you like to tell our listeners a little bit more about how they can get some additional information?
Yes, thank you, Laura. So we've covered a lot of ground here. The private sector has several resources up. I put them in the chat here. Let me do it again here, just in case I stay here. So you can register with the private sector SICE, no cost, at siceusa.org. They put a lot of time into putting up a blog about this app. And again, this is just the first of several that are coming. And those folks in the private sector, if you want to use this and test this operationally internally, there's information there on the post that you can get access to it as a subscriber for now. Again, this is not a public version tool yet, but we hope to have something ready here for the hurricane season, at least maybe not as robust, but that maybe limited from a data perspective. But again, it's all about synchronizing and getting people on the same page. So I put that in the chat again, Laura. And before we go, I just want to thank our speakers. Chris, we're looking forward to doing a lot more dialogue with you, and Greg certainly is the hurricane season role. And Carrie, I talk to you every week and appreciate your efforts along with the team at Ben Air. So Laura, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, I'd also like to thank our panelists today for being here. Appreciate the information. Wanted to thank all of you too for listening in. Hopefully you found some valuable information out of today's session. My email address is up on the screen. If you have any questions for me or the All Hazards Consortium, don't hesitate to reach out. And I'm happy to connect you to people or share some information with the consortium. I also wanted to encourage you, I know it sounds so far away, but on January 25th, 27th, please mark your calendars because it's the All Hazards Consortium second annual Resilience Exchange Summit. It's 3 days virtual. And we had great success with this. Last January, we had over 700 registrants. There's no cost to attend. If you visit our website at ahcusa.org, you'll be able to register already and hold your spot for that. So you'll hear some more about Fleet Movement app there, as well as other great sessions dealing with resiliency, critical infrastructure, and so on. So we encourage you to put that in your calendar now. And that is all that we have today. So I just wanted to say thank you again for attending. We'll send you that recording link, and everyone stay safe out there. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, panelists.